Yeah, thank you, sir, for connecting me. And I'm very happy to be one of the partners of this your effort and Institute of National Security Studies, that is a premier think tank coming under Ministry of Defense in Sri Lanka. And I think all the panelists, you know the rules and regulations, so you will have exactly 10 minutes. And I hope that you must have shared your PPTs if you have any PPT. And today we are going to talk about non-traditional security threats in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think the previous session also just discussed about non-traditional threats. And I think when it comes to Indo-Pacific region, this region is becoming very prominent region, because Indian Ocean, we know that, because it's a region, there's an ocean where heavy flow of maritime movements are happening. It involves with lot of trades, and therefore it has become a very pivotal point when it comes to present day scenarios, especially when it comes to trade and maritime security. So therefore, this region has become very significant area in coming days, and especially the present days and in future also. So in future, it will have more significance in this region. So, uh, so when it comes to non-traditional security threats in the Pacific region, diverse and increasingly relevant as geopolitical dynamics evolve. So these threats typically transcend conventional reality, conventional military concerns, and encompass a range of challenges so that affect national, regional, and global stability. Some of the major non-traditional security threats in the Pacific area, we can include like climate change and environmental degradation, then cyber security, then maritime security challenges, like mainly when it comes to maritime security challenge, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, piracy, and arms robbery, then disputed or territorial waters. So likewise, there are a number of challenges. So I hope that you will discuss all these things during our sessions. So the first speaker is Professor Brendan M. Howe. So he's from Ewha Women's University. So Professor Brendan M. Howe, so is Dean and Professor of the Graduate School of International Studies, and Ewha Women's University, where he has worked since 2001. So he is currently serves as president of the Asian Political and International Studies Association, and has been elected president of the World International Studies Committee from July 2025. So he has number of areas of interest, like he has authored number of books and articles, and he has discussed, authored on the topics like the protection and promotion of human security in East Asia, and UN governance in Cambodia and East Timor, and edited volumes on regional cooperation for peace and development, post-conflict development in East Asia, and peacekeeping and the Asia Pacific. And I think now I will kindly invite Professor Brendan to commence your proceedings.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you to the hosts for inviting me to join this excellent forum. I know we're very short on time, so I will be sharing a few PowerPoint slides, but hopefully we'll get through them quickly enough. Let me just... Okay. Okay, is everyone able to see my slides?
Yeah, I think we can see.
Good, good. Okay. So I'm going to build a little bit on the previous session where they're discussing the relationships between traditional and non-traditional security. And I'm looking at the changes in the nature of the international operating environment and the extent to which these provide new opportunities for new actors and new forms of international cooperation. So non-traditional security perspectives and new security challenges have seen the broadening of the scope of inquiry to include a focus on non-military rather than military threats, transnational rather than national threats, and multilateral or collective rather than self-help solutions. In 2005, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan referenced the interrelatedness of the three pillars of the UN by noting, "We'll not enjoy security without development, development without security, and neither without respect for human rights. Unless all these causes are advanced, none will succeed." Now, 20 years on, we can see that he neatly encapsulated the progress made by the evolution of security and governance conceptualizations, but also the ongoing challenges, that unless we're able to holistically address all of these challenges, we're doomed to fail in addressing any of them. But I think these challenges also represent noble opportunities for new categories of actor, and that's what I want to talk about today. Much has been written on the normative policy making of middle powers, but what I'm going to talk about today is deliberately a new terminology of second-tier powers, and also looking at new areas of cooperation that do not currently exist, but I think should exist, such as non-traditional security minilaterals and regional international commissions. So middle powers have generally been identified as those Western powers of middling capacity, which nevertheless have had significant impact on global normative governance initiatives, such as international commissions. Second-tier actors are identified here as having significantly greater capacity than most middle powers, and therefore also, I would argue, a greater responsibility to act. They can also be identified by their regional rather than global governance focus, and therefore may be more applicable for action in the Indo-Pacific. So the central research question I'm addressing is what role can and should be played by newly empowered or recognized actors in addressing non-traditional security challenges. First of all, I think we need to throw out the old, get rid of the continued dominance of the neo-realist, neoliberal duopoly in both theory and practice. Secondly, we need to challenge the ongoing primacy of the state in both domestic and international governance in this region. We need to challenge the ongoing hegemony of great state powers, both global and regional great powers, despite their abdication of constructive leadership and the systemic security threats posed by their competition. Indo-Pacific peace and security are more dependent upon great power leadership and cooperation than perhaps anywhere else. Yet such leadership and cooperation have hitherto been in short supply. In particular, the gravest contemporary non-traditional security challenges have been exacerbated by states following the dictates of national interest, as outlined by the dominant discourse, and by the abdication of leadership of the great powers. So how can we bring in the new, having got rid of the old? Well, new thinking on security has come to the fore, with input from academics and from practitioners of international organizations, and indeed middle powers. Many of the new governance initiatives have been promoted at, through, and by the UN in the form of international commissions. They have featured prominently in consideration of non-traditional issues of global governance. International commissions have helped overcome and transform outdated thinking on international security, development, disarmament, environmental protection, global governance, nuclear non-proliferation, and humanitarian intervention. And I think there are several important takeaways from these initiatives. First, they all attempt to employ a holistic approach to the challenges of international governance, encompassing traditional and non-traditional security agendas, building broadly along the x-axis of issues. Second, they challenge the artificial legitimacy and centrality of the state, building along the y-axis of referent object. Third, they reject the dominance of great powers, demonstrating the considerable initiating and agenda-setting potential of middle powers, including historically West Germany, Sweden, Norway, Australia, Canada, etc., and indeed prominent members of international civil society. So the major global human security programs have been initiated by the medium-ranked powers, Canada, Japan, and Norway, in collaboration with the UN as the manifestation of global society. So a lot of this is to do with middle power agency. But middle powers are experiencing increasingly severe challenges in operating on the global stage, often coming up against not only the harsh realities of great power intransigence, also regional epistemological resistance to their normative universalism. This has led some commentators to think that the middle power moment is over. But I think there are several elements missing from the contemporary analysis of policy and policy prescription for new agents. First, a regional focus in terms of both aspirations and actors demanded by the particularities of the international management of relations in the Indo-Pacific. Second, an evaluation of powers that have greater than middling resources and therefore greater capacity to affect change, especially when these resources are concentrated within a limited geographic region. And third, consideration of avenues for activism and cooperation within the non-traditional security fields. So second-tier actors herein conceptualized as actors that have greater than middling resources, but also concentrate their resources into geographically distinct regions. They're distinguished from traditional middle powers, which have more limited resources, but also traditional middle powers have global aspirations. They're also likewise distinct from rising powers because they don't have great power aspirations, or if they do use them, they no longer do. So who are the major second-tier actors and agents? Two regional actors certainly embrace the consideration described previously, Japan and South Korea. Other candidates for such agency can be considered in future, including ASEAN or some of its strongest member countries, and potentially Australia. In terms of capability, Japan has long possessed the attributes of a great power. Until recently, however, Japan has lacked the political will to be more assertive and to provide regional leadership in the security field. Indeed, it's being described as a reactive state in traditional security terms. Nevertheless, Japan has a lengthy history of proactive, non-traditional security advocacy. Meanwhile, in hierarchical power measurement terms, South Korea has long been more than a middle-ranked power. Such are the geostrategic and geoeconomic constraints upon South Korea, however, that the country has been conceptualized as being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Dr. Bandhan, sorry, Professor Bandhan, you have another 1 minute.
Okay. South Korea has also, however, been an important tradition of non-traditional security advocacy and leadership in regional organization initiatives. So rather than lament geostrategic inadequacies and challenges, it would benefit regional second-tier actors to divert at least some of their resources to cooperation to generate public values in ways that are not dependent on global consensus or on the involvement of the great powers. And I would argue these should include, but not be limited to, minilateral, non-traditional security cooperation of between 3 to 5 second-tier powers and regional as opposed to global international commissions? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Brendan. So you are sharp on time. So I think you started with your presentation explaining about very relevant the points given by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. There is no development without security. There is no security without development. So it's always I think applicable to any time. And you have explained about different level of the actors, levels of actors, and the other point is the NTS level that you mentioned that it's lack of leadership and cooperation, and then so because of that, without lack of leadership and the cooperation, so things getting worse. So and you mentioned about different level of actors and agencies, and especially you mentioned about South Korea and Japan. So how you tried to explain how Japan is proactive for this NTS. So I think with that now I will call upon second speaker, that is Dr. Pavithra Jayawardena. She is from University of Colombo. So she is currently a senior lecturer at the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Arts, University of Colombo, and she teaches introductory courses in international relations, geopolitics and research methodology at the undergraduate level, and critical theories in international relations, gender, migration and research methodology at the postgraduate level, both in Sinhala and English. And her research interests include dynamics in international migration, the challenges of democratic citizenship regimes, and transnationalism and the Sri Lankan diaspora. So with that introduction, now I will kindly call upon Dr. Pavithra Jayawardena to start your session.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, I think you
and
are.
That you can also see my slides. So thank you very much for the invitation to be a speaker at the Indo-Pacific Future Forum and to include me in this panel. I'm not sure what I'm going to share with you can be called as a non-traditional threat, but definitely the approach that I'm taking to understand Indo-Pacific is non-traditional and alternative. The findings that I'm sharing with you today is based on my study on what Indo-Pacific borders mean to Sri Lankan migrants who are living in Australia and New Zealand, which I recently published in the South Asia Research Journal. And in this study, I take a bottom-up approach, convinced by the scholarship on IR, international relations, from the bottom or from below. And if we are to actually understand the non-traditional threats, I think it's very important that we employ non-traditional and alternative research methods to view the world. So in that sense, I think I am building upon my previous speaker as well as the previous panel, and specifically what Dr. Amit Gupta was saying, that, how can we find regional level responses, initiatives, programs that the region might face, while also expecting Washington will also come into play. So in this study, I asked the question, what does Indo-Pacific mean for people who are living in the region? And I specifically look at this my sample Sri Lankan migrants who are crossing multiple borders between Indosphere and Pacific region, which the geopolitical term Indo-Pacific presents as linked. And why I think asking this question or paying attention to what Indo-Pacific means for people is important is because if Indo-Pacific to be a successful regional category or an integration, I think it is imperative that people embrace the concept. The concept becomes more authentic and contextualized. And if it becomes another artificial category imposed on people, on communities or smaller states, as President Benden said, the second-tier states and smaller states, the concept is likely to be short-lived, and it will feel like it is an imposition by the superpowers on the people and community. So by looking at what people think about the concept, we will be able to propose policies, programs, and initiatives that are needed to make the concept more people-centric and long-lived. So whose idea is Indo-Pacific in the first place? And I think during these 2 days, we have been talking about this a lot. And the relatively new geopolitical concept of Indo-Pacific is based on strategic choices of states and other stakeholders within and especially beyond the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The growing salience of Indo-Pacific as a terminology reflects that Asia is nowadays increasingly perceived as the world's region that is central to global prosperity and security. So I'm interested to ask, while our region is central to global prosperity and security, what does it mean for the security and prosperity of the people who are actually living in the region? So the leaders and policy makers especially from countries such as Australia, India, USA, Japan, Indonesia, they are increasingly using the term Indo-Pacific, reflecting a global reimagination of Asia. The concept of Indo-Pacific will definitely lead to a change in popular mental maps of how the contemporary world around us is perceived in strategic terms among certain elites in policy-making circles. It is, however, questionable to what extent such high-level diplomatic games and labeling remain largely alien to the common people living in the wider Indo-Pacific region. Some scholars think the term is an artificial preposition to identify a huge and a vague geography. Some identify the term as a classification to counterweight to China. This is based on the geopolitical and geoeconomic real-world consequences in the region, driven by the fact that China and India have become increasingly powerful as strategically and diplomatically expansive stakeholders, particularly regarding the economic and military capability. In this study, I studied Sri Lankan migrants, and you might wonder why Sri Lankan migrants. The reason for selecting this group is because they are a group who have experienced the crossing of many boundaries between Indo and Pacific realm in their daily lives, navigating legal, territorial, physical, ethnic, and racial, as well as linguistic identities and boundaries. So participants in the present study were expected to elaborate comparatively on their lived experiences, memories, and practices in their home society of Sri Lanka, a country in the Indosphere, and in their host country, Australia or New Zealand, a country in the Pacific realm. And the data was collected through interviews and based on semi-structured questionnaire and open-ended questions. So what does this mean for people? What I found in my study is that for Sri Lankans who migrate to Australia and New Zealand, Indo and Pacific are two separate worlds, a binary and a not as an interlinked entity. And the Indosphere of their home country and the Pacific sphere of the new home, especially in the areas of development, democracy, human rights, and freedom. Their perceptions and views were primarily affected by their positionality. They saw themselves as immigrants originally from a country representing the Indo region, but currently living in a country in the Pacific region. Among several views, two key themes I could see in the data, and I would name them first as citizenship as a border and ideology as a border. Talk about the first view first. The study found for people being a citizen or having access to rights and privileges in Indo and Pacific have two different experiences. Crossing Indo to Pacific, they would get more access to better careers, incomes, and entitlements to stronger labor rights, privileges, and some participants meant that they enjoy more political rights in Pacific world than in Indo, and acknowledging that their experience only come from their experiences in Australia and New Zealand, not other Pacific islands. And these comparative views had enabled them to see clear difference between the quality of political rights in the two worlds, according to them. And comparatively, they argued that the citizens in Indo-region have and experience restricted political rights, whereas in Pacific, it's the other case. Most respondents thought that once they crossed the citizenship border that become a legal member from Indo to Pacific, exclusively to developed Pacific nations, their socio-economic rights and privileges
Dr.
also
Pavithra, you have another 2 more
high
minutes.
quality. Okay. And in this background, they considered acquiring Australian or New Zealand citizenship as a victory, and they become winners. And in my paper, I discuss this more extensively. The second theme is ideology as a border. Respondents' ideologies send out a strong factor that differentiates the Pacific realm from Indo-world, especially ideologies related to development and self-identity. These two were playing a huge role in shaping imaginations of borders. Digging deeper, it appears that those ideologies are strongly influenced by colonial experiences and capitalistic discourses. And in particular, the response viewed the Indo-region as heavily marked by its colonial history involving much exploitation. So linked to this, they also perceived the Indo-region as stuck in the past and Pacific as a space that is heavily influenced by the modernity. The respondents linked such perceptions to their own future hopes, connected to their very personal futuristic expectations. So in conclusion, focusing on Sri Lankan migrants who crossed the territorial borders of Indo and Pacific, the study clearly found that they do not perceive Indo-Pacific as one region or a coherent unit. For them, those are two different worlds with many differences and little potential to be perceived as one region. Specifically, they viewed how citizenship rights and ideologies on modernity and self-identity differentiated the Indo and Pacific components from each other in quite diverse ways. These findings confirm that homogenizing the entire Indo-Pacific region across Indian and Pacific Oceans as one imagined unit is highly problematic for the people who actually live in there. Especially migrants with the region, as exemplified with the experience of Sri Lankan migrants, would acknowledge the complexities and heterogeneities within the region and among communities. Following statist and higher level geopolitical agenda might bring positive impacts in terms of achieving better multilateral international cooperation and strengthening security, but this would still have limited effects on ameliorating the prosperity, progress, and integration for migrant communities and individuals within the region. And I hope, as scholars and practitioners, we do not want the Indo-Pacific conception to be an artificial category used and enforced by and for statist and global geopolitical agendas without a direct relevance for the people who are actually living in the region. And this is why I think it is important to view Indo-Pacific also from the below, and to assure that it is people-centric. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pavithra, for your on time. So you basically talk about Sri Lankan migrants' perspectives. So you tried to explain about what is Indo-Pacific region with different opinions, and then you tried to explain what it means for migrants, then better legal and safety and prosperity, better careers, incomes, and entitlements to stronger labor rights and privileges. And what was interesting at that your point, the not Indo-Pacific as one region, but it has to be considered as but Indo as one region and the Pacific as two regions, so two units. So those are the highlights I just brought from your presentation. And thank you, Dr. Pavithra. And now we are moving to third speaker, that is Dr. Chime Youdon, National Maritime Foundation. So Dr. Youdon, Research Fellow, Head Blue Economy and Climate Change Cluster at the National Maritime Foundation. She's a Research Fellow and the Head of the Blue Economy and Climate Change Cluster at the National Maritime Foundation in New Delhi. She is the recipient of two prestigious fellowships, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, that is CDRI, and fellowship and the Vice Admiral K.K. Nair Fellowship. So she actively contributes to global expert panels, including the COD Working Group on Seaport Resilience under CBRI, and served as an expert member on the Sustainable Blue Economy during India's G20 presidency at the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So there are other credentials also. So just in order to save the time, so now I kindly invite Dr. Chime Youdon to start your presentation. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank NIS for the opportunity to participate in this very important event. So today I will explore how the rapid expansion of ocean-based economic activities intersect with pressing realities of climate change, extreme weather events, and sea level rise, factors that are profoundly reshaping the maritime landscape in the Indo-Pacific. So my presentation will focus on three key aspects: the vulnerabilities tied to ocean-based economic activities in the face of climate change, how these dynamics exacerbate non-traditional maritime security threat, and strategies for fostering a climate resilient and blue economy or sustainable blue economy in the Indo-Pacific. So ocean, as we all know, that covering 70% of the Earth's surface has always been central to human sustenance, culture, and livelihoods. Recently, concept of blue economy has gained traction that emphasizes the ocean, sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth while preserving the health of marine ecosystems. However, it has gained prominence as a pathway for economic development, particularly for coastal and island nations. For instance, the OECD estimate that ocean industry could double the economic contributions from 1.5 trillion in 2010 to 3 trillion by 2030. Similarly, the European Union's blue growth strategy envisions ocean as the drivers of innovative and investment. For Indo-Pacific nations, blue growth or ocean-based economic growth is not just an economic imperative, but also a matter of geopolitical strategies. Yet, this development raises a critical question about equity, governance, and resilience. So, the rapid expansion of ocean-based economic activities is unfolding against the backdrop of an accelerating climate crisis, where rising global temperatures are driving more frequent and severe extreme weather events such as cyclones, typhoons, and storm surges. Combined with the steady rise in sea levels, this phenomena poses significant threats to resilience of coastal and maritime infrastructure across Indo-Pacific region. So Indo-Pacific region, as particularly the 6 small island developing countries and also the especially countries in the global south, faces unique and compounded vulnerabilities due to mix of geographical, economic, and ecological challenges. So low-lying islands especially face sea level rise, and they are increasingly are facing risks. Because with the projections over 1 meter rise of sea level rise by 2100, threatening to inundate critical infrastructure, displaced community, as being it's being discussed in a previous speaker, and also it could disrupt port operation, which are the key infrastructure for the supply chain resilience. And also the extreme weather events are devastating the ecosystem and build infrastructure, further eroding the resilience of these communities. Parallelly, then we have another challenges, which is ocean acidification, which could impact the marine biodiversity and also undermining the livelihoods of dependent community who are dependent on the maritime resources. In addition, the reliance on maritime resources and unchecked expansion of blue growth initiatives exacerbate these vulnerabilities and amplifies several non-traditional security threats, including climate-induced displacement, with the rising sea levels and extreme weather events are forcing coastal and island populations to migrate, leading to resource competition, social instability, governance challenges in already fragile region, because we do not have framework or regional framework or domestic framework to regulate climate-induced migration. And secondly, the resource conflict. The unregulated exploitation of marine resources such as fisheries, seabed minerals can escalate disputes over ownership and access. For instance, overlapping territorial claims and resource extraction efforts have intensified tension in South China Sea already. And third, we have environmental degradation activities such as deep sea mining and port dredging disrupt marine ecosystem and also deplete biodiversity, which could impair the ocean's role in mitigating climate impacts like coastal or carbon sequestration. And also it will have economic inequities, marginalized community, particularly in states and global south and coastal areas that bear the disproportionate burden of these risks while receiving minimal benefits from the Blue Growth Initiative, which again is being discussed in the previous session. This perpetuates poverty and vulnerability cycles. And one, if I may highlight one of the keys and which risks amplified by economic growth in Indo-Pacific is China's large-scale land reclamation and artificial islands building, which not only militarizes critical waterways, but also destroyed coral reefs, harm fishes, and displays traditional fishing communities. These actions undermine regional stability and environment stability at the same time. So what are the ways that we need to look into this issue towards a climate resilience and just blue economy? So to address these intersecting challenges, we must reimagine blue growth through the lens of...
Chime, you have another 1 minute, right?
Sure. We must reimagine blue growth through the lens of climate resilience and justice. This involves the recognizing the interconnectedness of economic activities, environmental systems, and social equity in face of climate change. So, one important aspect to integrate into our policies is integrating blue justice into policy frameworks, where ensuring a fair allocation of ocean-based benefits to vulnerable communities, strengthening the inclusive governance to amplify the voices of marginalized groups, particularly states, protect marine ecosystems, and also building climate resilient infrastructure, designing port, shipping lanes, coastal infrastructure to withstand extreme weather events and sea level rise, where India's initiative CDRI, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, is exactly doing that. They are working with the small island developing countries to build infrastructure resilience, and where NMF, National Maritime Foundation, is also part of this project, working with this, especially with the Seychelles to build resilience of seaport infrastructure and operation is one of the initiatives that India is doing currently. And another aspect that we can do is strengthening the risk mitigation strategies, where deploying insurance instruments like climate risk bonds to protect coastal areas, also enhance early warning system to reduce vulnerability during the extreme weather events, foster regional cooperation for disaster response and recovery in Indo-Pacific. So another aspect we can look into is leveraging technologies and innovation, utilizing big data, AI, and also financing climate resilient is another big thing that we've been discussing about it in previous session as well. So I'll skip with the interest of time. So to conclude, Indo-Pacific stands at a critical juncture. The promise of blue growth must be balanced with the realities of changing climate and the need for social and environment justice. By integrating resilience into blue economy strategies, we can create a sustainable pathway that not only mitigates risks, but also empowers vulnerable communities and protects our coast. As a policymaker, researcher, stakeholder, our shared responsibility is to ensure blue economy becomes a model for inclusive growth, one that supports regional security, strengthening ecological integrity, and foster climate resilience future for all. Thank you. I end my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Chime. So you elaborated about the importance of having a blue economy and how we are going to deal with blue economy while preserving ecosystem. And you talked about the climate resilience and especially the climate crisis. You focused on especially the coastal-based community because of the sea level rising, the issues, the challenges they are facing, and the then what are the small state, the challenges of small states going to face, and challenge of marine biodiversities, and then finally coastal-based population migration. So because of the sea level rising, so they have to migrate. And other thing is you mentioned about, because by relating Indo-Pacific scenario, the conflict, the resource conflict for the resources, and you mentioned about environmental degradation, and you talked about China's large-scale land claim, and because of that situation, this the regional stability has been undermined. So, and finally, you concluded with the importance of how we should be climate resilience. So, thank you very much, Dr. Chime. And now we are moving to next speaker, that is Mr. Irfan Yar, the Afghanistan Security Institute. So Irfan Yar is the founder of the Afghanistan Security Institute, that is ASI, and a PhD candidate at Paris Graduate School. So he has worked with organizations such as the World Food Program, that is in Italy, the Global Counterterrorism Institute, that in USA, and the MacDonald Laurier Institute in Canada. So holding 2 master's degrees in area studies and international affairs. Irfan's expertise spans Afghanistan, terrorism, so radicalism, human rights, and refugees issues. So over to you, Mr. Irfan. Mr. Irfan, are you there? Okay, I think there are some technical issues. Now we'll move on to next speaker. That is Mr. John J. Vachaparambil. So National Maritime Foundation. So John Vachaparambil is an associate fellow at the National Maritime Foundation in New Delhi, India. He is a member of the Public International Maritime Law cluster, in which his research focuses upon the legal aspects of illegal, unreported, and unregulated, that is IUU, fishing, and the conservation of the marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. He holds an LLM in infrastructure and business law, and he has completed his LLB from Christ University in Bangalore. He also completed certificate course on oceans law and policy from Gujarat Maritime University. Over to you, Mr. John.
Chair, give me a minute. He is facing some internet issue. He is coming.
Okay. Then can we move to Mrs. Harriet?
Yes, yes.
I think better, no? So once he is rectified, we can move into it.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
So now we will move to Mrs. Harriet Njoki Mboce, University of Nairobi. And Njoki Mboce is a lawyer, consultant, academic, and policy advisor. She is also a certified civil and commercial mediator and qualified arbitrator. Born and raised next to Kilindini Harbour, west of Mombasa Island, Njoki's passion for the maritime space started at a tender age. So she has grown to blend this with other passions, law, policy, and security. Njoki is a practicing advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a founding partner at the firm of Njoki Mboce and Company Advocate. She teaches at the University of Nairobi, so where she is also pursuing a PhD. And
It's okay, Chair. We can skip the rest in the
Njoki
interest
is a
of
former
time.
visiting fellow at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, that is New Delhi, on India-Kenya Maritime Security Cooperation. So, over to you, Mrs. Njoki.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start and acknowledge the presentations that have gone before me and just then be able to piggyback on each one of them. And then to suggest that because of the conversations that have been going on with respect to the maritime space, the conversation that I'd like us to think about for the next 10 minutes or so is how we can reorganize to secure the Indo-Pacific beyond traditional means or interventions. And I then suggest that perhaps we need to consider lessons from the business world. One of the things then that inform this argument is a quote by Heraclitus, who is an ancient Greek philosopher. And he says that nothing is permanent except change. Therefore, it is important for us to ask ourselves, and has been mentioned by the colleagues that have gone before me, that indeed there are evolving challenges and opportunities in the Indo-Pacific that go beyond what has traditionally been there. And when I say that we need to consider lessons from the business world, having done some analysis, I will perhaps share that one of the key areas is innovation and technology. The other thing is how the businesses are able to adapt very quickly. The fact that businesses have chosen the route of building trust and legitimacy, data-driven decision-making, customer-centric approaches, human resource development and management, because in our interventions, we rely on people. The question of corporate social responsibility in terms of then getting citizen buy-in, the question of effective communication strategies, looking at how things such as propaganda can be used against our security structures, and how then the businesses have been able to tackle using that. The aspect that businesses have embraced of effective, transparent, and accountable governance, also strategic foresight and alternative dispute resolution. Those are some of the lessons that I think we can think about even as I continue with my presentation from what then the businesses have done. The central issue, therefore, in terms of what I am sharing with you today, seeks to address the growing significance of non-traditional security threats. Some of these have been mentioned as including climate change, public health challenges, cyber threats, migration or refugee crises, transnational crime, pandemics such as the COVID-19 as we saw. And these threats, as we see, are mainly non-kinetic. And they are also transnational in nature. And therefore, we can see the need for coordinated regional responses. But then we see that these threats, these non-traditional threats, are mainly often nowadays overshadowed by traditional geopolitical and military concerns. Even when you look at the conversations we've been having since yesterday, you find that, and it's really not a mistake. I mean, the traditional threats have been with us for many centuries. So it is understandable that we are still focusing on them, but then we need to move these other ones beyond the shadows of that. Some examples that, for instance, you see threatening whatever it is, and they're really emerging, is, for instance, even as now you are speaking, let's say when you're having this conversation, if you look at your phone, you could potentially see some pop-up advertisements on the topic that we're discussing today. This is an infringement of digital privacy. And sometimes it even influences security decisions that are made. But how did that person come across, or how did the system come across such information? By the breach of data privacy. We see chatbots, and we can imagine if chatbot communication was to come and infiltrate the navigation system, or any other system that then relates to security within the maritime space, the kind of ability to interfere with command or instructions that will then arise. Also, we can see the nature of, let's say, even demonstrations that are happening. When you see one country doing this, another country is informed to do that. When you see issues of drug trafficking, human trafficking happening here, because of the digital space that then we live in, there is a net effect of real-time coordination of crime and synchronization as well as transmission of crime being perpetrated. So although traditional security concerns like territorial disputes and military competition continue to dominate the discussions in the Indo-Pacific, as we have been seeing, nevertheless, I argue that it is becoming increasingly urgent that we also focus on these non-traditional security threats, because they undermine stability, they disrupt societal cohesion, and addressing these challenges demands not only greater collaboration among states, but it also means that we must bring on board other non-state actors, as we have seen. And this, of course, would include the business world, NGOs, the civil society, and just be able to build on them, for instance, even through public-private partnerships. And my proposal is that the reason that the problem that we face continues to persist in terms of even the alienation of these threats and the ability to tackle them effectively is because the existing frameworks and mechanisms for cooperation, as I've said before, are designed to address state-centric threats. And we have been seeing them from the beginning of our conversations yesterday. They therefore, to a huge extent, will lack the flexibility, they will potentially lack resources and innovation required to tackle the non-traditional challenges that continue to evolve. Therefore, it is important that we borrow from the best practices from the business world that I've said, such as leveraging technology, fostering cross-sector partnerships, and prioritizing efficiency that could significantly enhance the effectiveness of the various interventions that we come up with, especially when we're looking at threats such as cyber threats, so that then we're looking at questions of cyber defense, the question of propaganda and how it affects security. When you're looking about protection of interconnected systems, nowadays you may be in your office, but you have certain structures within the maritime domain that are relying on communication from land. So if there is interference, then you could potentially have miscommunication that then could potentially be harmful. Protection of internet connected systems, I've highlighted that. The other thing that then becomes important is to say that until now, many have assumed that when you address security, when you're addressing security in the Indo-Pacific, it primarily means that you should focus on power balances, territorial integrity, and military strategies. However, I'm suggesting that we need to visualize security in the broader terms, one that includes human security, environmental sustainability, and of course, digital resilience, as well as the other things we've been mentioning. Furthermore, it is important that the various institutions, including government and organizations, look beyond traditional frameworks that deal with security and embrace then the lessons that I've said from the business world. That will help in implementing proactive risk management strategies. So by highlighting specific threats like climate change, cyber attacks, pandemics that I've already mentioned, I underscore the need for strengthening...
Harriet, you have another 2 minutes.
Yes, strengthening regional cooperation, because most of these threats, when they are being dealt with, the countries are still looking at the silos. So just as corporations use real-time data analytics to anticipate market shifts, regional bodies can use predictive modeling to prepare for climate-related disasters or disease outbreaks and then be able to cooperate in that. So in conclusion, tackling non-traditional security threats is not merely an additional layer of existing security strategies, but a very, very necessary evolution of how we understand and approach security in the Indo-Pacific. Incorporating innovative tools, approaches, and participation from the business world into the policy-making processes can provide agility, creativity, and efficiency needed to effectively address these emerging risks. And this approach highlights that the changing face of security threats includes emerging domains of war. So it's not only the traditional domains that we knew. We now have the digital realm. Also, the fact that now security has new actors, including NGOs, civil society, and corporations. If you look at even the turnover of some companies, they go beyond many small countries. So perhaps we need to bring them on board, because they can also, if they were to collapse, they could, or if they were to invest in security threats, we could potentially have negative ramifications. So I'll leave it at this point. Chair, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Njoki, and it is very insightful, and you mentioned and highlighted about the growing significance of non-traditional security threats, and so you emphasized about the coordinated regional response mechanism. So that is very important, I think. And you highlighted about digital effects and how digital and the internet is going to be useful, and military competition, then NTS threats, how non-traditional security threats going to affect for the stability of the region. So you tried to highlight about the importance of the non-state actors. So non-state actors now, if we take the current situation, the non-state actors are emerging. So they are highly involved with the present scenario, present context. So you wanted to highlight the importance of taking down and getting them on board, the non-state actors, when it comes to the non-traditional security threat. And you highlighted about the importance of that we need a new approach. The traditional approach is kind of a state-centric approach. So rather than a state-centric approach, so we need to address all other non-state actors also. And you highlighted about the regional cooperation and the importance of strengthening regional cooperation, as well as digital resilience and the human security. And those are the points you highlighted, and thank you very much. And now, Mr. John, are you ready?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, you are laudable now.
Okay, so sorry for that inconvenience. There was some technical issue that I was facing.
No issue.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank the organizer, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, for giving me this opportunity. And I think all of you have gone through the conference booklet. So I'll be speaking on the topic IUU fishing in the Indian Ocean region and legal implications for India. This is a paper that I'm currently working on, and so I'll be giving a broad overview of what the paper will be covering. So IUU fishing, as the chair initially had mentioned, it is considered as a non-traditional security threat. But when we look into IUU fishing, it is not just a threat within the Indian Ocean region, but also in the Indo-Pacific region. And very often we see fishing vessels used as platforms for instigating maritime crimes, such as human trafficking, drug and contraband smuggling, illegal arms trades, among other things. And very often we also find reports and studies or news mentioning fishing vessels caught with various quantities of drugs and other arms on board. And also we can look at the 26/11 Mumbai terrorist attacks, wherein those terrorists hijacked a fishing boat and used it to reach the coast of India. So it is also a threat to national security. Now, when we are talking about IUU fishing in the IOR, it's not something new, as we are all aware of, but the numbers are increasing. So when we look at the data from the 2023 annual report of the IFC IOR, it reveals that 800 incidents of IUU fishing within the IOR were reported. And this is inclusive of incidents of poaching, unreported and unregulated fishing. And when we look at the IFC IOR's half-yearly report for this year, a total of 2,200 incidents involving piracy and armed robbery, contraband smuggling, IUU fishing, and other incidents were reported. But even if we go back to a 2015 study, the study reveals that 34% of catches within the Indian Ocean region are either illegal or unreported. So meaning it's always been, the IUU fishing has always been there and the numbers are increasing. Now within the IOR, if you look at the Northwest Indian Ocean compared to the eastern segment, specifically in the squid fishery, it is an unregulated fishery in the region, and the AIS data reveals a rapid increase in the number of fishing vessels in that particular area. So from a mere 30 vessels in the 2015, and the AIS data as of 2019 shows an increase to 279 fishing vessels. Analysis of the MMSI number also reveal an increase in Chinese distant water fishing fleets, with almost 40% of the reefers are being identified as flagged in China. Also, between the period 2017 and 2019, the number of transshipments in this particular fishery areas increased by 300%. Now, what we need to realize here is that squid play a very important role in the marine food chain, with species such as tuna and sperm whales feeding on it. So overexploitation could directly impact such species. So what I've identified here is that the number of IUU numbers are increasing globally due to, one, the gaps in spatial areas of competence, and the other reason is gaps between the groups of species covered by various regional fisheries management organizations. So when you're talking in perspective of IOR, then we have the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, Commission for the Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna, and the Southern Indian Ocean Fisheries Agreement. This notwithstanding, the presence of various regional fisheries advisory bodies in the region do not help in addressing the situation either. There is also the number of vessels being listed by RFMOs for IUU fishing. So if you look at the IUU vessel list in each RFMO's website, then you see the vessel numbers being increasing every year. Then on the sidelines, there are other challenges when you link it to IUU fishing, that is the continuous use of banned fishing gear and techniques, which leads to bycatch of protected species of sharks and dolphins, and then certain marine species life such as crustaceans are excluded from the ambit of existing RFMO. So there is no RFMO that deals with conservation or sustainable harvest of crustaceans. Now, when you put that into perspective in India, India's marine fish stocks are already depleting, and in a study, it was revealed that of the 135 stocks that were assessed, 4.4% were subject to overfishing and 8.2% were already overfished. India also faced threats from the increasing number of Chinese distant water fish fleets in the Northwest Indian Ocean. So in 2022, China launched a voluntary fishing moratorium covering international waters in the Northern Indian Ocean. And the moratorium said all Chinese vessels should stop fishing in that particular area for a particular period of time. But however, there are reports that indicate these vessels are entering India's EEZ at night, switching off their AIS and indulging in IUU fishing, and then which also lead to dark shipping. Then India also have an issue of prisoner's dilemma when you're talking about resource depletion, wherein Indian fishers are indulging in unreported and unregulated fishing, which is also leading to bycatch and increase in discards. Reports also indicate there are violations of the national fishing ban, fisheries regulations, and the marine fisheries regulatory legislations of coastal states. So fishermen from one coastal state is transgressing into the other coastal states, leading to various legal issues. On the sidelines, there is also an increase in illegal wildlife trade of protected species listed in India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So there's also an increase in illegal shark fin trade. People are getting caught within India with shark fins and other protected species. So all these issues are affecting India's fight against IUU fishing and its SDG 14 index. Now, recently there's a numerous debate on the impact of climate change on fisheries, and India is also facing the issue, and impact of climate change is only exacerbating the situation. And the number of transgressions by Indian fishers across the international maritime boundary lines is giving to regional fisheries conflicts. So official data of transgressions is increasing within the number of Indian fishers getting arrested in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan. The numbers are increasing every year. So I would like to say that while international law, so we are referring to the UNCLOS 1982. So it provides member states the freedom to fish on the high seas, but a lack of regulatory framework is leading to overexploitation of species by foreign vessels in foreign EECs. This is also leading to security implications for coastal states. So when you're talking about increasing Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region, so the security implications also should be considered. So I would say that regional collaboration and cooperation is necessary between nations Also between RFMOs, so that they can also look into areas beyond the coverage and include species within their jurisdiction. And we need to also improve monitoring, control, and surveillance, which is essential when you're talking about high sea fishing activities. So with that, I would end my presentation. Thank you.
Sure. So on time. So basically, you wanted to speak about from Indian perspective about the IU fishing incidents and the number of vessels involved and how these IU activities going to affect negatively for Indian interest. Especially you mentioned about some Chinese vessels involvement and movements in the Indian EEZ, exclusive economic zone. And you mentioned about this Mumbai terror attack also, how the insurgents entered into the city by using the avenues of seas. And other thing is you came up with a number of data, so very important. And I think it gives some different perspective about the how the IU fishing and the activity is going to be increased every year. And same time, you highlighted how these incidents going to affect for state like India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and all. So again, you also mentioned and elaborated about UNCLOS 1992, and but there are some the challenges also going mentioned about that. Then you mentioned about security implications for coastal states. So and the you need to, and you emphasized about monitoring and controlling and having importance of proper surveillance. And thank you, Dr. John. Now, Irfan, are you there? Irfan, are you connected or still you are undergoing some technical issues? Irfan, are you there? Dr. Pramod, I think he has disconnected. Mr. Irfan, am I audible? If you can hear me, just send me a text. So if he is not online, so I think we can go for some questions. Ladies and gentlemen, what is your opinion? So shall we go to the question? Okay, then until he reach, I think we can go for the question. We can take a couple of questions. There is a question for Professor Howe. So the question is, how can second-tier actors leverage regional organizations like BIMSTEC or ASEAN to promote cooperative initiatives that address shared challenges such as disaster preparedness, maritime security, and food security? Professor Brendan.
Everyone.
Professor Brendan, can you hear me?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, thank you for the question. I'm very interested in the role that second-tier actors can play in regional organizations, but also the roles that regional organizations can play to address non-traditional security. If we look at the major donors to the WHO, World Health Organization, the United States is the lead donor, but the other 9 of the top 10 are either second-tier organizations or representatives of civil society. So there's a major role that regional organizations can play, but also if you look at the existing traditional security minilaterals, undermining regional international organizations. Non-traditional security minilateral would see being played by regional international organizations, either as one of the 3 organizations could propose international commissions, as has been the case, EU partnering with middle powers at the global level. I foresee in the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN and other regional international organizations being at the forefront of promoting regional international commissions. I hope that people got that. I see you're still freezing, but some of that got through.
Yeah, Professor Brendan. So can you a little bit more elaborate about this, how this is going to affect food security? And Professor Brendan, can you just explain about the food security also?
Okay, food security. I didn't hear the question related to food security. I don't see it in the chat. Okay. One of the challenges. Yeah, well, certainly, again, when it comes to non-traditional security issues, the great powers have not been great at providing leadership. So if you look at any of the challenges, whether it be human insecurity, whether it be food insecurity, whether it be COVID-19, whether it be climate change, whether it be transnational pollution, some of the worst offenders are either the great powers or the rising powers that are aspiring to great powerhood. So I think we need to a certain extent, bypass the roadblock caused by great powers in order to generate regional food security, regional human security initiatives. And we saw this a little bit when it came to the vaccine diplomacy and also personal protective equipment being dispersed by regional second-tier powers like South Korea, like Taiwan, like Japan, that they were the ones that stepped up, not the great powers. So there's a great deal of potential, I think, in reviving, for instance, the East Asian community, which was a proposal of former President Kim Dae-jung many years ago, that this is where we need to look for action, not relying on great powers for these non-traditional security initiatives.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Brendan. I think we got a very lengthy answer. And another question for Dr. Pavithra. The question is, how does Sri Lanka's geographic location make it vulnerable to geopolitical risks stemming from non-traditional security threats, and how can it strengthen its resilience?
Thank you very much, yeah, and thank you for this question. I think now as we have, as people from Sri Lanka, we know that our location, there's certain narrative that, we are in a very risky position. So it's, we are so much dependent on what is going on in the region as well as in the structure. So there's always, pick and choosing, powers, balancing great powers, all that, given our island character, the Indian Ocean, and, where we situate, and of course, our level of capability in responding to various threats. And I think as both Professor Brendan and Harriet were talking about, there are several non-traditional threats are also impending on Sri Lanka because of its character, because of its geography. But just to say that these are the only threats is also an underestimation, that there are also threats that we face nothing related to our geography. So I think as a country, in deciding our responses to traditional and non-traditional security threats, and I'm kind of also skeptical about these two terms. I usually try to see the interlinks of these two, because if we really use these two categories as completely mutually two exclusive ideas, we tend to find different policies and different options that are not mutually linked. So I think what we need to do is we need to think of our priorities first, our national interest, and in doing so, I think it's not only the in-house population that we should think, but also a vast minority migrant community across the world. And thinking about these two, we need to come up with our proposals. And in doing so, I think it's very important that we expand our network of friends in the global arena. Right now, we are almost with only the great powers. Even the conversations within the country in the policy bubbles are only about our relations with the United States or China or India. But I think in a world where minilaterals are coming up, even rival powers would come together for mutually similar interest. I think we need to expand our net of friends with great powers, as well as the second tier powers, as well as even third tier and smaller other organizations. I think that is where we are lacking, but I hope with the new government coming into power, I think there's also an opportunity for us to think everything new. The global politics is going through a transition, so I think there's a lot of possibility as well because of our geostrategic location.
Yeah, I think Dr. Pavithra is very correct, and Sri Lanka needs to explore our connections. I think there are certain areas we have just neglected, especially Sri Lanka is yet to have some kind of connectivity in the African region and even the Central Asia. So now that dialogue is going on, how Sri Lanka can engage Central Asian region. Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Pavithra. And there's another question for Mrs. Harriet. The question is, how can partnerships between governments, the private sector, and civil society create more robust and inclusive responses to emerging security challenges in the Indo-Pacific? Mrs. Harriet, are you there?
Yes, I am. Oh, sorry, I missed my question.
Yeah. The question is, Ms. Harriet, how can partnerships between governments, the private sector, and civil society create more robust and inclusive responses to emerging security challenges in the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you very much. I'll just start by giving an example of some engagement we had very recently,
where because of the traditional approach to security, you find that it is only the traditional kinetic responders, the military responders, who then have been expected to offer solutions. But you find that now, if you, and in line with embracing this approach that I'm therefore proposing, if you bring the various stakeholders to a sitting and you're able to say, okay, we have climate problems, we have migration problems, we have these other kinds of problems, and you bring people to the table within the context, sometimes if it's internal, within the context of the various relevant ministries. If it's international, you bring it within the context of regional communities, the RCs, or even within the UN. But again, I am hesitant to suggest the UN framework because it's a long shot sometimes and it takes a bit of time. But what I've seen working pretty well is where you get the, either through bilaterals, multilaterals, or those domestic ministries, you get various stakeholders, be it CSOs, be it business, stakeholders. Bring them to the table. Don't tell them that you have solutions. Tell them, please share the problems that you're facing. They'll articulate them so clearly. Then you ask them, now, how can we work together to address those challenges? When you do that, you find that many of these organizations and many of these stakeholders actually already have their shopping list. So when they give you their shopping list, now you ask, because everybody else, just as with this conference, everybody else is listening, you ask who thinks they can be able to work together with so and so, or with this organization, or with this country to bolster that particular facet. And you find, as I have seen increasingly, especially in the past 8 months or so, the uptake in terms of this approach is catching up, and you're finding that capacity gaps are then being addressed, because where you thought you had a big problem, you find then there's a country or an organization or a business that actually has a surplus that they are willing to help you with, or to invest in your whatever initiative that you're having. So the first thing is to get people to sit together and get the problems to come from them and get the solutions to come from them as well, as opposed to the traditional military recommendations or military interventions then being shared or being implemented or being quote unquote imposed. Thank you very much.
Okay, Harriet. There's a question for Chime. The question is, how do climate-induced events such as extreme weather patterns threaten blue economy sectors, and what adaptive strategies can be employed? Question from the page.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. So climate-induced events such as extreme weather events patterns pose significant threats to various sectors of blue economy, which includes maritime industries, coastal tourism, fishery, shipping, maritime resources management. So if I give one example, specifically fishery and aquaculture, how extreme weather events impacts them. So the storm, floods, heat wave can disrupt fish habitats, alter fish migration patterns, and reduce fish stock because of the ocean acidification and also ocean warming. It could impact the fish migration pattern as well. Additionally, ocean acidification and warming affect coral reefs, marine biodiversity, which are the source of or habitat for fishery and other important coastal ecosystems, which would then impact the supply of seafood or in the supply of food security in the larger. It would also impact the coastal tourism, which then impacts the infrastructure, hotels, resort transportation facility are also vulnerable to the extreme weather events. So if you ask me what are the adaptive strategies so far, one of the best or immediately that's something that every nation can do is include climate or integrate climate change impact and extreme weather events into the climate policies or policies across the sectors. And secondly, nature-based solution or ecosystem-based solution is something that we can implement where conservation and restoration of mangrove forests, coral reef protection, coastal wetland restoration can enhance the resilience of coastal areas, which because this ecosystem act as a buffer, reducing the impact of storms, erosion, while supporting the biodiversity. So then also sustainable fishery management is something that can be incorporated and looked into, and policy integration in climate finance is something the governments and stakeholders should integrate into blue economy policies, which ensures climate adaptation policies. So yes, I hope I answered this.
So, Chime, what do you think about this regional geopolitical tensions? How it's going to affect for this climate resilience?
Regional geopolitical tension and territory dispute over the maritime borders and territorial waters, maritime resources could lead conflict that disrupt trade, investment, and resource exploitation in the oceans. And also, it may escalate into tension conflict, destabilizing regional and global maritime trade, because we are already facing or vulnerable to climate change events and extreme weather is something that we are out of our control, and it may exacerbate, which require more resources. And because of the geopolitical tension and territorial dispute could also impact the climate finance that we currently global south or smaller island developing are currently seeking, that would also impact. As the good example could be the Ukraine-Russian war and other tensions across the region. Because of that, the funding is getting reduced, and also the multilateral corporations are also getting impacted. That would impact on the climate finance.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chime. And there's a question to Mr. John. John, are you there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah. John, there's a question from INSS. What role can regional cooperation play in addressing IUU fishing in the Indian Ocean?
Regional cooperation.
Yeah. What role can regional cooperation play in addressing IUU fishing in the Indian Ocean?
Okay, so when you're talking about regional cooperation, so between nations or like between navies, so I'll give a general answer for that. So when you're talking about enhancing regional cooperation, it simply means you're able to contact with the other nations. You are able to identify what's happening around the high seas or within their EEC. So this will prevent transgressions which is happening. Like, so when you look at the Indian Ocean region, there's an increase in transgressions happening not just from by the Indian fishers, but there is transgressions happening from fishermen from other littoral nations. And also there is an increase in distant water fishing fleets. So all these activities are impacting the region as it is. So when you're talking about regional cooperation, then it would enhance monitoring, control, and surveillance within the region. So nations are able to share information of IUU vessels listed in their respective areas. So we can monitor activities in the region. So sharing of information will be enhanced. So all this would prevent, as a region, would prevent like increase in IUU numbers and everything. So, and if you look at cooperation between RFMOs, so RFMOs can also enhance and collaborate, share information of the IUU vessel list within their list of vessels, and also within navies also, like you can monitor activities on the high seas, track vessels that is indulging in fishing, and then also prevent dark fishing from happening. So that is like a general answer.
Okay, thank you, John. And There's another question to Dr. Chime. How non-traditional security threats impact on blue economy sector?
Yes, sir. So it largely covers in what I already said in the previous portion. So non-traditional security threats would impact blue economy because climate change is one of the non-traditional threat, right? Because how it's impact. And also the piracy, maritime crime, terrorism, organized crime, all would exacerbate because already existing, all would exacerbate the non-traditional security threat in a way or both. And all of existing non-traditional security threat also would impact the climate change impact, and extreme weather events impact on the coastal communities, especially the vulnerable. For example, piracy, human trafficking, illegal fishing, drug smuggling in maritime spaces can undermine the security and economic viability of blue economy. So these activities increases risks to shipping, trade, maritime industry, lead to instability in coastal and maritime regions. So one example could be attacks on the oil platforms in Gulf of Guinea or hijacking of vessels in Southeast Asia can disturb energy production, right? And also if the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic would be one example how it impacts the supply global chain. Because if we have these multiple events happening at the same time, then it would impact the global supply chain, food security, water security, all of that.
Okay. Thank you. And I have a question for it is open to any panelist. Now President Donald Trump is just to come to the Oval Office, and now we saw a couple of X messages of President Donald Trump, and he already openly expressed about some kind of tax increasement and the increasing of taxes, as well as about some seems to be kind of a trade it's paving the way for a kind of trade wars. So if such kind of situation, because we know that President Trump is not in favor of climate change factor, so probably he might deviate, US might deviate from all the obligations of the climate change challenges. So in that case, this kind of scenario, how it will affect for our Asia Pacific region. So when it comes to the supply chain management. Professor Brendan, do you have any idea?
Chair, I can perhaps okay. I'll let Professor go first.
Yeah, I was a little unclear about your question, whether you're talking about supply chain management or about climate change and environmental degradation. I think for all of these, the important thing is to recognize that the former system, the globalized international system, has essentially fragmented in part because of the United States. Not exclusively, but we've moved away from the global aspirations in both economic terms and in normative terms. But there's still hope for us to have regional cooperation, which we then can build on so intra-regional, following on from intra-regional cooperation. And I think the emphasis, instead of top-down normative imposition of universal values, so a universal rights approach, instead we need to look at an overlapping consensus from different regional and epistemological traditions on universal wrongs. So what is it that we can agree needs to be dealt with because it's not tolerable from any regional epistemological tradition? And if the United States under Donald Trump refuse to play ball with this, then we have to move on without them.
Yeah, Harriet, you wanted to say something.
Actually, Chair, my response will be very similar to that, because as you have seen in this session, the presenters have made it very clear that when we look at non-traditional threats, we are seeing other actors, apart from the ones that were previously considered to be superpowers. We are seeing other people rising up and occupying the space. I mean, we were given the examples even during COVID-19 pandemic. It was not the US that was first to assist many countries. We saw other people filling the gap. So if the American approach then would be that of we are not going to participate, it is very unlikely that we will have a vacuum. What could potentially happen is then America could increasingly lose its pace as a very critical geostrategic player. So whereas maybe some countries would take longer to catch up and assist, but the vacuum wouldn't stay, if at all, it wouldn't stay for long. So I think it is also for the US to really rethink its approach in terms of some of these global challenges and what role especially it is interested in playing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Harriet.
Yes, Chair, I also wanted to add on to that. So the implications were a reduction or withdrawal from global climate negotiations by the Trump would send a signal to retreat from US leadership in climate diplomacy, which could significantly undermine the global climate cooperation. But at the same time, it also weakened the global consensus of climate action. More so, the US absence from global climate leadership would lead to reduced multilateral efforts or less coordinated action. That also could be, especially in terms of climate funding, I think it would impact. And also country might pursue their own national interests, potentially undermining the collective goals. So there are implications, of course, because it will impact the US and both the international organizations or multilateral organizations that matter.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. And Mr. Irfan, are you there? Are you online? I think he's not online. So I think we can take another couple of questions and wrap up the session. There is a question to Mr. John. IUU fishing in the Pork Strait is becoming red hot and still issue is not narrowed down just to violation of maritime rights of countries share the sea area. But how this affect the blue carbon economic system? How devastating and how can we scale this damage in terms of economy? For what remedies do we have to plan for this issue?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. So I'll deal with the first part of this question. So IUU fishing the Pork Strait? Yes, I agree that it's a very big issue between India and Sri Lanka, the transgressions and also the role of Indian Navy and Sri Lankan Navy and the issues. So it's all like news reports and everything. So this issue is very clear. So it's happening, it's out there. And it is right that it's also violate the maritime rights as laid down in the UNCLOS 1982. So the rights are also violated. So how does it affect the blue carbon ecosystem? So I would assume that when you're talking about blue carbon ecosystems, then in the Pork Strait, so it's also a protected area. There are coral reefs there. So if you look at, so how do we scale this damage in terms of economy? So what we can look into is how is fishing affecting coral reefs in the particular area or in the Pork Strait? What are the ecosystems available? So when you talk about India, then there is an illegal trade of coral, protected species of coral that's happening. So because of overexploitation of fish stocks and every other species of marine life. So people are indulging in illegal wildlife trade. So that also leads to destruction of protected ecosystems. And so what can we do in terms of protecting? Then we'll have to have stronger regional cooperation, ensure that there is Indian Navy, Indian Coast Guard, Sri Lankan Navy, Sri Lankan Coast Guard is actively involved, make sure there's less transgressions happening, and also active monitoring of what's happening near the Park Strait, because it's a protected area. So you can also have a regional cooperation in monitoring what is happening in the protected area, because if there is less MCS available in that particular area, then it will be difficult to monitor exactly what's happening. So I would suggest that it is better to have a stock assessment or of what is happening within the Park Strait, and then identify specific issues of what are the blue carbon ecosystems getting affected, if there is an increase of illegal trade of corals, if there is any illegal trade of protected biological diversity, for example, any species of sharks or anything else mentioned in the Wildlife Protection Act of India. So you can have a stock assessment first and then scale it to how it impacts India's economy. So
I think that information sharing is very important now. That
yes.
is the area we need to focus. I think very recently that joint operation which was done by Sri Lankan Navy and Indian Navy to
Yes.
nab some illegal narcotics. So I think that's a classic example. So if we work together, we can achieve some more good and satisfactory results.
Yes, also I would like to add on that even like a regional cooperation under the BBNJ agreement also would enhance protection of marine life and marine protected areas between India and Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I think in the meantime, the capacity building also
Yes.
very important. I think especially this region, especially when it comes to the some countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives. So we
Yes.
need sort of because we are a bit lacking of the higher technology. So that technological integration also very important. So I thank you, John, and Dr. Pavithra. You have a question. In what ways does human trafficking and labor exploitation impact Sri Lanka's societal and economic development?
Yeah, that's, I think, a very broad question and slightly out of the focus of the panel, but, very broadly speaking, well, the research show that every time when your economic rates are downgraded, the issues like human trafficking and labor exploitation goes up. So we are in that stage in Sri Lanka. On one hand, if you look at, female labor participation, that is dropping, and we have a higher number of, unemployment, and informal sector is growing, and that means that, people are in the labor but without protection and security and safety. So, so obviously, labor exploitation, human trafficking, and these days, women are migrating as with various other visas, and then get involved in get hold of various very unfortunate incidents. And I think it definitely affects our society and our economic development, because as we have started this panel, you cannot talk about development if that's not sustainable, if that doesn't assure the human security. So I mean, I'll stop there because it's a very large question, but as a very important question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pavithra. So, any more questions from others? I think we are distracting from Mr. Irfan, so we can take other questions if others have any questions. So, panel is ready to answer. And my final question to the panelist, now because of this geopolitical competition, how do you analyze the developing scenario? Like now countries are these major actors, the key players, they are gradually they are increasing their defense budgets every year. Even country like India, China, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Taiwan. Taiwan is not a country, but it's administered by China. But all these countries are heavily increasing their defense budgets. So with this kind of development, do you think that this region is becoming kind of militarization? What do you think?
If I may go first.
Yes, Professor.
I think there are three related problems to this. First, by increasing defense budgets leads you less budget to spend on non-traditional security and human security related issues. Secondly, the inherently confrontational nature of increasing defense budgets and focusing on issues undermines collaboration and we see this in the minilaterals that currently exist in the region, that they're essentially, when they say like-minded, they're squaring off into exclusive clubs, focusing on benefits for just the 3 to 5 security allies in those minilaterals, rather than collective value or collective goods for the wider region. And the third problem with focus on defense expenditure is that it creates uncertainty in the region, because no one is sure who has the upper hand if you have spiraling defense budgets. However, I think that a couple of ways in which we can tackle this is first by focusing on non-traditional security cooperation, where leadership is not provided by the great powers. This is non-exclusionary, it's non-hierarchical, it's less confrontational, and can lead to region-wide cooperation. Secondly, once we get cooperation in the non-traditional security arena, this can spill over into cooperation in the traditional security arena. So yes, it's worrying, but also we shouldn't be too concerned that this is automatically going to lead to an outbreak in hostilities, because we still haven't reached the level of gratuitous arms racing in the region. The most of the military expenditure increase has been because of retooling regional militaries, not a gratuitous increase. And also, if you look at the percentage of the budgets of countries in this region that's spent on the military, because of economic growth, there's been an increase in expenditure, but not a dramatic increase in the percentage of the budgets, with the exception of North Korea and Russia, I believe. And that's mainly because of economic collapse, that the percentage of their military budget has increased. Myanmar has always been dramatically high anyway, so we haven't seen a dramatic increase. We've just seen an economic collapse, which makes it seem like a dramatic increase.
Thank you, Professor Brendan.
Chair.
Can I also?
Yeah,
Yes, Harriet.
Pavithra, yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you. And I also agree with what Professor Brendan said. And there's this, recently we did a kind of an activity in one of our master's classes, and we had some simulations, and we assumed that the countries in our region are supposed to go to war. Would they make that decision? It was very interesting to see that, we thought that a war still would be too costly. So we sort of thinking about this realist idea that, the best way to avoid war is to be prepared for war. So that kind of, and because it's too complicated now, going for war and what you would receive out of it. But I was also thinking in terms of the defense budgets, as my previous speaker said, it's also very difficult to get the policy mindset and the mindset of the security apparatus to shift into a more secure human security direction. And I think that is something that, as scholars, as researchers, as practitioners in IR, and as people like you, Chair, who are, representing different bubbles at the same time, should push for that. Otherwise, I think, if we don't get that shift very seriously in the policy level, in the academic level, of course, we talk about human security, we have the literature enough, all that, and research, conclusions, all that, but how to implement the change. And we have been based on international organizations, but with what is happening to multilateral system and faith on international organizations, with the upper hand, with Western norms and values are decreasing, what would be alternatives? I think that would be an interesting question to answer. Thank you.
Chair, just a few comments on that as well.
Yeah.
To say that in itself, I do not think that having increased budgets is necessarily a bad thing. Resources, as many more, are good. The challenge, however, would be the question that we need to ask ourselves is, to what extent then that additional resource would undermine collaboration? So the thing is, if the states were to just increase their budgets and not include other stakeholders, as we have been saying are important, including the civil society, including the businesses and all those people, then we will not have buy-in. There wouldn't be confidence building, along those investments, and that will therefore just mean a drop in the ocean. But if they increase the budgets and loop everyone in, then that becomes very helpful to bring in perspectives, to bring in expertise, and to also continue to add, and to diversify the resources. But states alone cannot assume that when they inject more resources, then they will be able to effectively deal with the problems. Thank you.
Sir, I would like to add to
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
Yes, thank you. So you have rightly asked that Indo-Pacific region is at forefront of geopolitical competition, particularly China. I want like to highlight intensifies its military expansion and regional influence, where they have been actively militarizing and securing the Indo-Pacific region to enhance its regional dominance and protect its strategic interests. In response to that, India, especially, I wanted to highlight that what India has been doing, India's policy, Maritime policy Sagar, which is security and growth for all in the region. It emphasizes maritime security, regional cooperation, and sustainable development, while reinforcing India's role as a security provider in the Indo-Pacific, where it says that it's security and growth for all in the region, where one country cannot grow and other countries cannot be suffering. So this is to ensure a balance of power, safeguard maritime security, and promote economic growth in the rules-based order. So I think all the countries in the Indo-Pacific region have to work together and work in the multilateral engagements. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. I think currently, if we take the entire world, so there are 120 conflicts are fighting at the moment. So out of 120, I think 60 non-state actors also involved. I think the best thing is the political leadership to avoid the wars. I think waging war is a political decision, and the implementation is the part of military. So I think best thing is try to avoid the conflicts and try to maintain the balance and stability between the region. So I think that's the message where the politicians must look for. Is there any other questions?
Sir, we don't have any questions, and we should also
Okay,
wrap
Dr.
up in 2-3 minutes.
Then
Sir.
we can wrap up, ne?
Yes.
Okay, I think we had a very wonderful panel, very elaborative and insightful panel. And on behalf of Dr. Pramod and the organization, I extend my sincere thanks to Professor Brendan Howe and Dr. Pavithra Jayawardena and Mr. John and Ms. Harriet Mboce and Dr. Chime Youdon, and Irfan. I think unfortunately we could not connect with him, but in fact, even though we we extend our sincere thanks to you also. And I think it was a very insightful and very fruitful session. I think there were many number of questions, so all the panelists, they answered very informative way. And thank you very much for all the participants and the panelists. And thank you very much, Dr. Pramod. Thank you very much for connecting with us, especially Sri Lanka Institute of National Security Studies. Thank you and have a good day.